Hello. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Jake. Hello. Hi, LinkedIn. Welcome to our LinkedIn Live this Wednesday. I have to just say, I don't know if you saw that, Jake, but the music was lovely. I could have
Yeah,
just shut my eyes and started meditating.
me too.
I haven't I haven't done one of these LinkedIn lives for a while. I've been off for a few weeks doing this. Hi, oh, there's Ryan. And Ryan's been making some adjustments, and it's pretty cool. So I'm very impressed. So LinkedIn, I'd like to introduce you to Jake Potter. So, and Jake, you can introduce yourself, but we're going to be having a chat today. But do you want to just explain who you are, what you do? Hello,
Of course.
Sandy. So we've already got people joining us. So yeah, go for it, Jake.
Love it. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me on today. I'm so excited. And this is actually my first LinkedIn Live, so having that fancy 30-second thing was really cool. But yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jake Potter, and I work for a telecommunications company called Colt. And we provide B2B connectivity services around the world. My day job is head of social media, and a lot of my job entails executing the strategy for social media for Colt. And then I also have a side job as a volunteer for Pride in London, also as their head of social media, executing their strategy as well.
Wow, you're a busy person, Jake, I think. And I think we've got so much to talk about. When you say head of social media, what does that entail? So, because there'll be folks on here that may be dedicated to looking after brand channels, some might be responsible for social selling. What does your role entail?
So my team basically owns social media for Colt. So we are putting out all the organic posts on a daily basis. We partner with our marketing teams on paid social activity, and we're also leading the social selling projects at Colt to get people to extend our brand messaging, but also position themselves as thought leaders on social media as well. And I'm sure there's even more than that
Yeah,
to share as well, because we are a busy
yeah,
team.
yeah. How many's in your team then? Just out of interest, you.
There are three of us. So I have myself, and then Eileen, who's based in Germany, and we have Jorge, who is a video content specialist, who is helping us create lots of exciting videos. We recently launched on TikTok, and he is helping us create our TikTok videos as well. So yeah,
Right.
we're
Well, we're going
small,
to be
small but
talking.
mighty.
Yeah, yeah. I always say small tribe, large impact. That's
Yeah.
what we like. We're going to talk about TikTok later. I didn't know about that one, Jake. So we're going to talk. Right. Right, we're going to talk a little bit about social selling today. That specific function of your role, your team's role, and when. And why did Colt start paying attention to social selling? I'm really curious to understand when it started, how it started, everything. So maybe you can just give us a bit of a
Yeah, of
overview of
course.
that.
So I started at Colt almost 5 years ago, and when I first got there, we had a chat with LinkedIn, and they told me that the footstep of Colt, it was like 65,000 followers at the time. The footprint, sorry, not footstep. The footprint of all of our employees combined, we have 5,000 employees around the world, was something like 2 million.
Wow.
And just hearing those numbers just made me think, oh my gosh, we have a huge opportunity here to leverage the people and get them to start sharing our messages. So it started, I'd say, fairly small. We just started having lots of conversations with mostly salespeople and saying, hey, do you know the power of social media? Do you know what it can do for you? And as time went by, we just grew it bigger and bigger. And we started to think beyond sales. How can we use other teams like HR to sell the brand as a good place to work as well? And it just grew so much over time. And what started as like a little kind of just copy and paste these messages onto your LinkedIn for us grew to building confidence for those people to actually write their own social media posts, find their own content, and use tools as well, like employee advocacy tools.
So you do. So you mentioned employee advocacy tools. So you've already joined the dots, it sounds like, between your social selling program and your employee advocacy program. So do your sales teams use that tool as a content platform then?
Yeah, so we say to people at Colt, if you want to be on it, you can be on it. So there are sales channels within it which focus on things like product messaging and campaigns, and then we also have the more kind of employee advocacy bit, like why Colt is a fantastic company to work for and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Now that's something you've mentioned as well that I sort of tuned into. I'm jumping around a little bit here, but you've already mentioned that you work with marketing on paid social, and
Yeah,
probably content, I'm sure. And you also partner with HR as well. So you're working with sales. So you're
yeah.
quite a social team that is connected to different parts of the organization. Now, was that your initiative to sort of get your arms around all of that and reach out to them, or did they reach out to you? How did that?
I'd say there's a little bit of each. I would say, like in the beginning, with speaking with sales, it was a lot of me going to them. But when you start seeing the results of it, like if you connect with Colt people on LinkedIn, you'll see there is a lot of messages from Colt people, and so other people around the business start seeing the success of that, and then they start reaching out and thinking, how can we leverage this more? I am a firm believer that um, people's KPIs. They're not just that team's KPIs, they're everyone's KPIs. They enable the success of the business. So it's really important for, say, HR, if they need to get really high quality people joining the business, um, like we obviously can help with that. And it's all about sharing those KPIs and achieving each other's goals together.
I love that. You're taking a holistic approach to, the activation of the entire, but you're already doing it. This is so cool, Jake. You're connecting the dots between different functions because a lot of people talk about ROI. So I'm going to ask you a bit about that in a second. But before I do, anyone who's watching this, if you've got any questions for Jake, now's a good time to drop them in the comments. I have a list of questions already, but quite often I don't ask any of those. I end up asking different ones. So I'm going to focus in on KPIs, Jake. So
Yeah.
a lot of people will say, how do you measure it? When we did our event just recently, the question that came up over and over again, how do you measure the impact of social selling? So how are you measuring the impact of social selling?
Very good question. But I think there's a few ways to measure it. I think it's quite hard to say, okay, Bob shared this social post and now we've just generated millions of pounds.
Yeah.
That's a really hard thing to do. I think we have to rely a bit on salespeople to say, like to put it into their CRM system to say, okay, we've been doing these activities. We know this is warming up a lead. But also we focus a lot more on engagement rates. So we use employee advocacy tools. They help us identify engagement rates.
Yeah.
And we also can see how many shares are taking place each month. So our current KPIs are focused on shares and engagement rates because I firmly believe there's no point having a huge audience if they're not engaging with you in the first place. So
Exactly.
we put a huge focus on that engagement. And I think ultimately that would be more successful for the business anyway. It's easy to share that number, and it's easy to explain to people too, rather
Yeah.
than hoping that you can connect it to a financial figure.
Yeah, no, and I often say, it's about correlating the numbers, because you can. Do you use Sales Navigator? Do the sales teams use the Sales Navigator platform?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can get a lot of data out of that and then correlating it back to your advocacy tool. So you can see
Mm.
if your most engaging sharers or your sharers that are generating most engagements are also your top social sellers. And, you
Yeah,
know, where do the
absolutely.
patterns start? It's
Yeah.
it's quite
Yeah,
cool.
and I think it's key for people to remember that social selling is not going to be the answer to everything. Like it's a very great, I love it. Obviously, I do. I talk about it every day. But these kind of activities help nurture your leads. They're not always going to be the lead generative thing. It will help lead generation, but when it comes to nurturing, like for me, if I'm buying a product, if I only see that this person talks about that one product, I'm not super interested. They're just trying to sell me something. They're trying to get my money. Whereas if I see that they're talking about various things within the industry and they're positioning themselves as an expert, I'll be a warmer lead. I'll probably end up buying that service from that
Yeah.
person. And I think people also need to think that way. It's all about the warming part of the process. It's not necessarily just the lead gen part of it.
Absolutely. And I this is where I sometimes see that people take offline techniques and try and apply online, right? This is about
Yeah,
relationships. It's about digital relationships. And that isn't the case of I found someone through Sales Navigator and now I'm just going to bombard them with calls until they let me talk to them. And
yeah,
they basically use it as big database and then revert off.
yeah.
It's actually the relationship building part, which is quite interesting, isn't
Yeah,
it?
and we definitely live in a relationship world now, especially I think since COVID. If anyone wants to play a drinking game, I've mentioned COVID.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think like apart from COVID, we really learnt the value of relationships, and that's what social selling is really key for. It's helping you build them.
Yeah, and help us, and being able to scale it as well, and not just we often say, quite often you'll be you can only make so many phone calls in a day, right? If you want
Yeah,
to reach more people and nurture more people and educate more people and add value to their days,
yeah,
this is a good way to do it. Um,
absolutely.
so I'm quite interested. I'm going to ask you something about how you've enabled the team over the last 5 years. But if I could just take you back 5 years when you had that conversation with LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Was there something happening in your industry that triggered this change? That triggered the um, we need to do something differently. Were you seeing something, or did you just get curious and think, what is this social selling? We need to maybe do some of this, or what happened?
Um, there's I'd say a bit of a two-pronged answer to this, which was um, we did just want to try something new and something
Mhm.
different, and this looked like the opportunity. And when I joined Colt was my first job in telecommunications. I came from Oracle, so I'd done a lot of like B2B kind of software, hardware kind of stuff in the past. So the first thing I needed to do as a first-time telecommunications person is be like, what's everyone talking about on social media? And it just seemed like all all the businesses were talking about the same stuff and in a very similar way, and there wasn't many people doing things in a unique way. And I think the people approach was the most unique way to do it, because once people get the confidence to write their own stuff, it stands out a lot more. So it makes us look even more unique.
Yeah, and so that's quite interesting. Then what did you do? So you had this conversation with LinkedIn. So I'm trying to help organizations that may be watching this later
Yeah.
or even now. What was the process? Because there's only three of you in your team, and you
Yeah.
mentioned there's 5,000 people in the company. How do you fill that gap? What did you do? Did you scale yourself? How did you do it? How did you get people on board?
So I spoke to various different groups. So I mentioned earlier we focused at the beginning on sales. So we went straight to the person who was CCO at the time and say, "Hey, there's an opportunity. Do you agree with it?" And that person said yes, which was a fantastic start because we had the boss saying, "Okay, guys, it's time to start doing this thing." Um, and then from there, we built a framework. And we were thinking, what is the most important thing for salespeople right now? And salespeople, their jobs are quite complicated, right? They're not just trying to sell. They're updating a sales platform with what the opportunities are. They're trying to call people. They're trying to have meetings. They've got to speak to various different teams. Maybe they've got to get deals approved. There's so many things that salespeople need to do. So we built a framework based off of simplicity, basically, and ease to do it, which is why in the beginning it was a little bit kind of like you can just copy and paste this
Yeah.
and put it on social. Um, because if you want to get people on board, you need to make it as easy as possible. So we started creating these messages and showed them how easy it was. We then focused on creating value, so that they could understand that they actually had a huge opportunity. So I had lots and lots of meetings. Colt sales teams got lots of like smaller teams. So I was going to all these team meetings, presenting this framework about how easy it is and that kind of stuff. I was saying you can have a training anytime, one to one, or even as a group. I was doing tons of one-to-one sessions, and I was also, after having all these meetings, I then started auditing people's LinkedIn profiles and started identifying where they were on their journey. Because I mean, someone like me, I use LinkedIn all the time. So someone might advise me to update my profile picture because I don't quite look like my profile picture anymore. But that's the only thing that I would need to update on my profile. I share content, my profile's pretty up to date. But you'd also come across people who created a LinkedIn profile like 15 years ago when they first finished university, heard about this thing called LinkedIn, and they're still standing there in a cap and gown on their profile and never updated it since. So you got to start identifying those journeys, and then building tailored trainings for the people who are beginning journey, middle journey, and very far along. Um, which was very actually interesting because everyone always says to me, "Oh, but I bet you expect the people who are maybe slightly of the older generation to not do anything on LinkedIn and younger ones to be the ones that are really active." Not the case at all. It was a complete mix, which meant those trainings became really interesting because you got all these
Mm.
opinions from people in the room from different backgrounds. It's a very diverse conversation.
Yeah, that is fab. Oh, there's a couple of things you've mentioned there about embedding yourself in other people's teams' meetings. Somebody else mentioned that on a previous session. I wish I could remember who it was, but I think it might have been Keith from Zurich, who now works in the world of rugby. But he said that he used to make it his business to go and sit in everybody's meeting to try and advocate what he was doing, rather
Absolutely.
than waiting for people to arrive, which is exactly what you've just described. So.
Yeah, and it's definitely like we shouldn't sit in a separate team and be like, "Hey, you should be doing this." We need them to understand why, and by being in those meetings, we can actually also understand the problems that they're having and how we can make it easier, I think, for them as well. So, embedding is key, I would say, absolutely key.
Yeah, you've got such a service mentality, I think, Jake. I think that is such an interesting perspective. Danielle Guzman last week also mentioned about one-to-one. So
Yeah,
personalization at scale, you enable them, but give them somewhere to come to say, look, if you need some help, which is what you've just said, I'm
yeah,
always here, just ask me. Most won't, but the ones that do, then will get the help, won't they? And
yeah,
move to the next
definitely,
phase. So
definitely.
so you didn't so some organizations, they'll go out and cherry pick and say, right, you must do this. Did you wait for folks to just say, yeah, I'm in, can you help me? And then when the next person raised up, or did
Yeah,
you?
in the
Yeah.
beginning, it was trying to just get those people who were interested to do it. I really wasn't in favor of forcing people to do something that they weren't quite willing to do. And by doing that, I felt that we had really good case studies, like a couple of months later, of like, hey, here's this person who's done fantastic. And also, if they're willing to say how it's helped them in their sales cycle as well, that was also really good. And in the end, what happened was we had these people sharing what they thought. And I would never say it became compulsory, but became more of a you should be doing this thing. Like every sales manager was really pushing for it. And we started to get goals for each team and little like these small teams would have little competitions on who can share the most and who would get the most likes and comments. There wouldn't be any prizes, but it was just like little team competitions. I would go in and present the updates and who's done the best this month and that kind of stuff. And it really inspired people. Salespeople are super competitive. So if
Yeah.
anyone here is wondering how to get salespeople to do this, just do a little competition. It's
Just
brilliant.
to shift behavior and
Yeah,
gamify it. That's
yeah.
fab. I love, yeah. And I think that is a natural behavior for sales, isn't it? So it's not
Oh,
going to take
totally.
too much and you don't have to give anything away. It's just a case of who's on the engagement board, right? Who's driving
Yeah.
more conversation. I am curious though, because things change, right? People leave, new people join. How do you have cohorts that go through this? I mean, do you bring people through always? Do you, or when people are moving into a new role, do you bring them on? Do you do one-to-one training? How do you keep up with people?
Yeah, so I work with some of the teams at Colt who tell me who the new people are each month, so we can have one-to-ones with them. Colt is also really focused on training their teams, and they have regular sales trainings every week. So we work with our sales enablement teams to get slots in those trainings and do our social selling training. So not just new people, but people who've been at Colt for a while can have a refresher as well. And I would say if you work for a company that's got all these like multiple teams, really do try and get them on board because they're ultimately going to help you do that. So I have a very good relationship with our sales enablement team, and they really help me get in front of the right people to present to them.
And I'm assuming that's where you offer the update training, right? So, because as we know, LinkedIn it loves changing the algorithm, love changing the interface, and is that where
Yeah.
you introduce hey, new this week, or do
Yeah.
you have newsletters, or how do you stay in touch and keep them?
So we have a newsletter that we use via our employee advocacy tool, just because within that you can also drive people back to that tool and get them to share more stuff. So it's a very nice feature. So we do that to let people know about new features. And yeah, every training I do, I'm like, hey, there's these new features coming out or have just come out and update them now. And some features that people love. If you are a global company, people love that feature. You can have multiple languages in your profile. So if
Oh yeah.
someone in Spain, for example, has a language set up as Spanish, they can have a Spanish profile. People love that feature. And I found this new feature, where you can pronounce your name to
Oh
help
yes.
people. My colleagues are loving it.
Yeah.
They just love it. Yeah.
Wait till they get LinkedIn Live, Jake. You're going to be
I know, right?
you're going to be stopping them, trying to stop them. No, I think, well, all of these features, I think, especially for international companies where the name pronunciation, you're not quite sure how to say it, it's a great feature. And,
Yeah,
and I think it's introducing all of these, isn't it? And just helping the teams
yeah,
increase their
definitely.
knowledge. Right. Gosh, content mix. I wanted to talk about that. So, already you're joining the dots between your social selling and employee advocacy tool. So, can you tell us a little bit about the content mix that you've got in that advocacy tool? Because
Yeah,
I'll give you a bit of background. So quite often some organizations where maybe it's a marketing or communications led advocacy program, a lot of brand content. But salespeople need to be trusted advisors in the industry, so they need a bit of third party industry content. So there's a little bit often a bit of a clash depending on who's leading the tool. Do
yeah,
you own the tool, and
yes.
what's your content mix look like, please?
Yeah, so my team owns it, which is good because we get to pick what content goes on there. And we have a ton of third-party content on ours. Like I was saying earlier, when I personally want to buy a service from someone, if they're just selling, if I was buying from Colt, for example, and they were just like, buy this Colt product, buy this Colt product, I'm completely turned off. I do not want to buy from that person because they're not telling me that they're reading about the industry and they're an expert. So we make sure there is tons of third-party content on there to help them show that they're reading about the industry as well. And this kind of content, because with telecommunications, focuses on things like 5G, like high bandwidth, and that kind of stuff. But it just really shows that these people are reading about the industry, and we advise people to really kind of almost put more weight on the third party stuff than the cult stuff. We still find people at the most do a 50-50 split, which I'm fairly happy with that. Um, but we try and push people to share more third party stuff and have the cult stuff complement it. And then the cult stuff can focus more on like unconsidered needs a little bit more, like things that people haven't thought about yet. So yeah, we put a huge weighting on third party content basically.
Yeah, that
And yeah, our tool actually has RSS feed built into it, so it can help us get that content without us having, as we're a small team, and put a lot of
yeah.
effort into finding it.
Yeah, too much manual intervention. And I think that also is a bit of an issue for organizations that don't have a lot of resource around social is how do you manage and administer that content?
Yeah,
And you can RSS feed in your brand channel type content or certain industry content, and then somebody has to check it, just make sure it doesn't mention competitors or whatever. But
yeah.
anyway, um, wow, I've got so many questions to ask you, Jay. Right, where are we? Right, I do want to talk about TikTok because you did
Okay.
mention that earlier. And that wasn't on my list of questions, but since you've mentioned it, can you talk to me a little bit about that and
Of
Colt on
course.
TikTok? What's going on? What are you doing?
I know it's crazy, right? So yeah, I had a few conversations with some people internally about getting Colt on TikTok, and I wasn't. I'd put my hands up immediately and say I wasn't like, yay, let's do it, because I just wasn't sure. Like I've seen companies on TikTok, and it's like cringe, and I was a bit concerned that we would end up looking cringe. So what I ended up doing was try to create a strategy specifically for TikTok that would enable us to get kind of the younger people to want to follow us and engage with us, but try and make it less about cult. I think when brands talk about just their brand, that's where it gets cringe. And when I see brands do TikTok dances, no, please don't, please
Stop.
don't. So yeah, I created this strategy that looked at three different areas of what I think might engage that audience. And it's also important to remember that it's not just Gen Z that are using TikTok. I think it's like 40% for Gen Z, and then the rest is split between the other generations. So there are other people on there as well. Um, so I thought, how am I going to do this? Let's think less about the word cult and try and get that not in a video as much as possible, and talk about what cult does and how it can educate people on what it does.
Yeah,
I find most people don't know how the internet works. I mean, if anyone knows how the internet works and how we're watching this live, pop it in the chat if you want to, but it's fascinating. So we focus on how the internet works, and then we talk about myth busting. If you go on the internet and just Google 5G, there's a lot of people saying 5G is going to be the thing that ends our lives and that kind of stuff. So it's just like myth busting, that kind of stuff. And then the final one is about what's it like to work in the world of connectivity, so that we really inspire an audience of people to actually want to work in connectivity or at least work in like IT in the future. We've only got 3 videos so far,
Okay.
because it's only been a month. Um, but we've just spoke about these 3 kind of areas so far. We're getting not 1,000 views on TikToks, but not far, which I'm okay with for a B2B TikTok. I think our highest one is 860 views currently. Um, yeah, and we're just focusing on educating a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, it is edutainment, as somebody previously said, isn't it? It's the platform for edutainment.
Yeah.
So, um, but who's creating that content then, Jake? Is it you? Are you like I know I'm going to sign up. I am on TikTok, so I might subscribe and have a little look at those videos. But
Yeah.
I've not published anything before anybody goes rushing off to find me on TikTok. But yeah, but who creates
Well,
the content?
if you'd like to follow us, that's was Colt_technology. Just put that little little thing in
Plug.
us. You can
That's
watch
all
these
right.
TikToks. Currently, I am the face of TikTok of our TikTok account, and I work with my team member Jorge to film them. But we're looking to build this out a bit more, as well, because we do want to show how diverse the world of telecoms actually is, and so we want to show more people, and get lots of different kind of opinions, as well, showcased on our TikTok account. So yeah, only 3 videos so far with my lovely face on it, but I guarantee you'll see more faces on there soon.
I love it. Great. I think it's brilliant. Courage, brave, brilliant. I'm going to have a look at it.
Thank
You've
you.
just made me think about that actually, and about how you can engage employees to create content. And I just
Yeah.
wanted to talk to you. Seeing, I know I'm sort of maybe going slightly off brief of the social selling, but if you have active employees, do you also invest in influencer activation? So, do you invest in employees to become experts in the face of the brand around their topic? Is that something you're exploring or have thought about?
Um, we have a little bit. We haven't got very far with that. So we actually we called it the influencer program, a few years ago, where we cherry picked like the most active social media users. We gave them content before anyone else got it, and they were able to share it. And it was very successful. But with the way kind of COVID happened, we decided to then focus on just like everyone and try and get everyone to do it.
Yeah.
But I'd love to bring that back, because
Yeah.
actually love doing that little program.
Yeah, I almost think that's it. When you talked about your pillars, the starting, the middle, and the more
Yeah,
advanced. It's those ones that are in the advanced that are hungry for more, aren't they?
yeah,
And they can create content. And I'm thinking, you TikTok videos, Jake. It's like you could start putting them on there, employee
yeah.
generated content.
If only I had my notepad.
Yeah. Sorry,
I'd
I'll take
start
you
writing
down.
notes myself.
I'll send you the notes after. Um, so I can't help but look. So anybody who's listening to this on the podcast, you can't see it, but I can see all those medals at the back there, Jake. What's that all
Thanks.
about? Is that I
Um,
crossed the line? Was it?
yeah, so I've run 2 marathons, about I'd say I think 7 half marathons, and then a number of 5Ks and 10Ks, as well.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. I've done a couple of half marathons, but I've not made it to the marathon. I don't think my knees will get me that far. Oh, well done, Jake.
thank
Um,
you.
Brilliant. So I did also want to touch on you. You also mentioned it earlier. You're also a volunteer at Pride in London, so you manage their
Yeah.
social media channel. So I wondered if I'm really curious. We've got June's coming up, Pride Month. I just would love to hear how social media has helped you in that role. How you use social media for that community, because you're talking about the business community,
Yeah.
but that must be a completely different dynamic. Maybe it's not, but can you share a little bit about your role there and what you do?
It is completely different. Just to just
Yeah.
answer that bit, it's completely different. I'll tell you why in a moment. But yeah, I've actually wanted to volunteer for Pride in London for years, and last year I saw this head of social media role, and I thought, hey, I do that in my day job. I could do that as a volunteer. Be easy. Um, and um, and I got it, which I was really really happy about, obviously.
Oh,
And the focus for that is a lot more about engaging the LGBTQ plus audience and allies as well, and sharing news about what's happening, mostly in the UK because it's London Pride, but also around the world of what's happening there as well. And I've always wondered, I quite often hear B2B people say about B2C people, oh, it's so much easier to work in B2C. I've heard B2C people say it about B2B, and I can tell you they are both hard in their own ways.
Oh,
They are so
wow.
good.
Oh,
Because I would say with like B2B, you're really trying to engage people because
yeah.
it's not necessarily the easiest challenge because you're trying to sell to the business. So our challenges there in B2B. B2C, they're incredibly engaged
Yeah.
and they're so engaged. And also because it's LGBTQ stuff, there's a lot of people with opinions as well. So you have to kind of um, get through the noise of the opinions as well.
Oh,
So yeah,
wow.
very different kettles of fish for sure.
And are you publishing content there? Are you managing the community and the conversations? Are you facilitating conversation? Because I imagine that is going to be I didn't realize that was the difference actually, that you've got
Yeah,
highly engaged and interactive. I mean, you've got to be all over that all the time, and it's fast moving, and
yeah.
things could explode, and you're not quite sure, where. So how yeah, that's fascinating. I don't know. I don't
Yeah.
know what I want to ask. I want to learn more though. How
It's
you're
incredibly
managing,
fulfilling
is
because I
it?
love doing it, and Pride in London. For those who don't know, it's entirely volunteer led. There is no one there being paid to do their job, so everyone who is there is just doing it for their love of wanting to do this fantastic thing for LGBTQ plus people. So it's really fulfilling, and there's just so many fantastic people there. So yeah, it is amazing. But yeah, we're posting the organic content. Like even today, for example, we announced a 50p coin that there's a Pride 50p coin this year because this year's 50 years since the first Pride. So we're sharing news like that. Um, there's a lot of stuff going on at the moment about conversion therapy for LGBTQ plus people. So it's being banned for people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, but if you are trans or non-binary, then they're not banning it. So that's another big thing that we have to kind of get that message out there. We want people to write to their MPs, like that kind of stuff. So we're really trying to generate that conversation,
Mm,
and then also making sure people are aware of like LGBT days. Like yesterday was International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia. So just making sure people are aware that there's all these things to celebrate, actions to take to help things better for LGBTQ plus people, and things you can participate in as well.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
it's an interesting job for sure.
But then and are there lessons that you are taking from that role back into Colt? Are you noticing, that things that you think, do you know what, that's actually quite different in this role, and actually I'm going to take that back to the business and how we do things there.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of stuff like because with Pride, we really want people to join the conversation. So we're trying to get more questions out there. And I take a lot of that kind of questioning and put that into Colt a bit more now as well. So I'm trying to get our audience just to answer a question and get them to give their opinion on a certain matter, even if it's things like, what's the next big thing for telecoms? We want people to say what they think it is. So definitely take a lot of their engagement as tips, and also the way we share news. I think it's really key. For Colt, we're a B2B brand. You see loads of B2B brands on social media with a very robotic voice being like, hello, this is a press release. Please read more. And from Pride, I've learned that you can be like, everyone read this fantastic news. Why don't you just like spend 5 seconds reading this article? Probably bit better written than that, but I've taken a bit of that and applied it to Colt as well, and see a lot more people be excited about our news as well on social.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
and I think at the end of the day, people they relate, don't they? We've got to try and humanize the brand and create
yeah,
conversation. So, and I do think it B2B socials, but we can be a bit broadcast and a little bit less conversational. And
yeah.
social is a conversation, so it's
Yeah,
an
and at the
interesting
end of the day, it's
observation.
just people, isn't it? There's just people everywhere. Like we might be selling to businesses, but it's people like you and I that are buying those services. So let's speak to the people and not as robots.
Yeah, and be okay with that. We had great conversations last week actually about humanizing the brand and being
Mm.
confident about that. And I will ask you a little bit about that, about leadership buy-in to an open social program at Colt, because I wonder whether do you find hesitancy? Do you find a little bit of resistance? Do you find a bit of, it's a bit risky, isn't it, that we let our employees? Or it sounds like you got early on stakeholder buy-in, which probably
Yeah,
helped.
our
Um,
leadership love it. They're all
Oh,
on LinkedIn. They're all active. In fact, our CEO, Kerry Gilder, she became an official LinkedIn influencer about 2 weeks ago, because she's so active on LinkedIn that they picked her up and said, "Hey, we'd love for you to be in our official program." So yeah, our executive team, they're all on there, and kind of like being the like front runners, making sure people want to share content because the people at the top are doing it.
yeah. I do think activating leaders is such a key part, because not only do they inspire employees, but leaders who engage with employees on social, it just shows it's like, oh, they're listening to me. They were seeing what I'm doing. It can do an awful lot for engagement, retention.
Yeah,
The leadership role is massive. It's amazing,
absolutely.
Jake, what you've achieved. I mean, do you have programs specifically for leaders then, or have you just have you let those guys crack on and you've been focused on social selling and advocacy?
We try to work with everyone, so we do speak to our executive team and help them have content as well. But I really think it's really important for them to be as authentic as possible. So I don't want to give them a ton of content. I want them to talk about what's valuable to them, and let them do that. So I do help them, but I rather people try and be as authentic as possible, so they don't need me to micromanage as
No, and
such. Yeah,
well, people can spot that as well, can't they? I
yeah,
think.
absolutely.
So I've got one final question before we close.
Okay.
I know a lot of people who watch this back or watching live. What would you do differently over the last 5 years? Were there any sort of mistakes that you kind of think back and gone, perhaps wouldn't have done that? But if you could do it all over again, what would you do differently?
I love this question. I'm trying to think of a good answer. What would I do differently? Um, I think if I was to do it differently, I would not just focus on sales in the beginning. I know we're talking about social selling as such, but I think if if I could have picked sales and then HR and then product people and did that at the same time, I think would had a bigger impact quicker. And I think when it comes to social selling, you're trying to make as big of a stamp as possible. So try and engage as many of the right stakeholders as possible, and
Mm,
maybe don't include ones that aren't as important. And I think also really have confidence in what you're trying to sell. Like when I first joined Colt, I was the first ever social media manager, and I was the first person trying to sell this kind of thing to people. And I probably wasn't as confident in the beginning as I should have been, because obviously I was in new industry trying to sell this new thing to these bunch of people. Um, so yeah, do have confidence in what you have to say. And there's this thing I tell myself when I'm in meetings where the confidence kind of wanes a bit. It's like, hey, if they've got you in your meeting, they clearly want to hear what you've got to say. So have confidence in the program. And I wish I did right at the beginning. I wish I was so much more confident at the beginning. Now I am. I mean, I not even stop talking now. I can just talk about it for hours on end.
I think honestly, I do believe it's amazing what you've done, and the fact that you've
Thank you.
recognised about connecting the dots so early on is pretty cool, Jake. I think there's a lot of organisations that haven't yet done that, and therefore fall into the trap of slowing program success down,
Yeah.
duplicating tools, duplicating effort. And just not connecting the dots. So I think what you've done is an amazing job. So and thank you for sharing it with our community. Honestly, I
Thank you
think
for
that's
having me.
yeah, or any lessons that you've got or anything that's superb. You've been really open and generous, so I appreciate that. And I'm going to bring it to a close. So I don't see any more comments on the comment field, but I want to thank you so much, Jake, for your time. And
Thank
we'll
you.
chop this up into little bits and we'll put it on the podcast as well. And I can't remember who we've got next week, but we do have somebody else next Wednesday as well. We run these every Wednesday, just chatting to people like Jake who so generously share their experiences. So thank you. Thanks so much, Jake. And
Thank you for
thanks
having
everyone for
me.
watching. All right, take care. Bye
Bye
bye.
everyone.